Yemen's Houthi rebels launched drone attacks on key Saudi oil facilities on Saturday, setting off blazes that could be seen from space and showcasing how cheap new technologies allow even minor militant groups to inflict serious damage on major powers. The drone attacks, some 500 miles from Yemeni soil, not only exposed a Saudi vulnerability in the kingdom's war against the Houthis, but raised the specter of other Iranian-backed groups using similar techniques elsewhere in the Middle East, including against American targets, experts said. This takes the proxy war to a new level in the region, said Faria al-Muslimi, co-founder of the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies, a research group focused on Yemen. Of the Houthis' drones, he said, their ability to cause pain is very high and it costs very little. It was not clear how badly damaged the facilities were, but shutting them down for more than a few days would disrupt world oil supplies. Between them, the two centers can process 8.45 million barrels of crude oil a day, amounting to the vast majority of the production in Saudi Arabia, which produces almost 1/10 of the world's crude oil. The difference in resources available to the attacker and the victim could hardly have been greater, illustrating how David and Goliath-style attacks using cheap drones are adding a new layer of volatility to the Middle East. Such attacks not only damage vital economic infrastructure, they increase security costs and spread fear, yet they are remarkably cheap. The drones used in Saturday's attack may have cost $15,000 or less to build, said Wim Zwijnenberg, a senior researcher on drones at PAX, a Dutch peace organization. While the Houthis benefit from no significant financial resources, the drones have given them away to hurt Saudi Arabia, which was the world's third highest spender on military equipment in 2018, spending an estimated $67.6 billion on arms. The attacks hit deeper into Saudi territory than previous strikes, and the Houthis claimed to have used 10 drones in the operation, which they said was one of the largest aerial operations they have carried out. Iran has supplied drone technology to the Houthis fighting the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, a panel of experts reported in January 2018 to the United Nations Security Council. United Nations investigators say the Houthis have since obtained a more advanced drone than those cited in that report, with a range of 930 miles, the Associated Press reported. The Houthis have attacked Saudi infrastructure before, primarily hitting less vital targets with missiles that had much shorter ranges. The strike on one of the centers hit, in Abqaiq, is particularly worrying because it processes crude from several key Saudi oil fields, said Helena Croft, an analyst at RBC Capital Markets, an investment bank. This is the mother lode for an attack on Saudi infrastructure, she said. We have always been concerned about an attack on Abqaiq. Whether world oil supplies are disrupted will depend on the degree of the damage, she said. Such a disruption could lead to a release of oil from the United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve. A former senior executive of Saudi Aramco, the state-owned oil giant, said the company had enough reserves to keep world supplies steady if the plants were shut down for a few days, but a long disruption would be another matter. While there were no reports of casualties, the attacks struck at the core of the Saudi economy. They came just as Aramco accelerated plans for what could be the largest initial public offering of stock in the world, an event closely watched by investors globally. The Saudi Interior Ministry reported fires at the two processing centers in Abqaiq and Quraysh before dawn on Saturday, and later said they had been attacked with drones. In a statement, the ministry said both fires had been controlled and contained, the Saudi-owned news network Al Arabiya reported, but gave no further detail. A Houthi spokesman, Brigadier General Yahya Saree, said in a statement broadcast by Al Masirah, the faction's news organization, that the group's forces carried out a massive offensive operation of 10 drones targeting Abqaiq and Quraysh refineries. The Houthis, supported by Iran, the kingdom's chief foe in the region, have tried to take the fight to Saudi Arabia before, though their efforts have been pinpricks compared to the devastation in Yemen. Saudi Arabia thought a bombing campaign would quickly crush its enemies in Yemen. But 3 years later, the Houthis refuse to give up, even as 14 million people face starvation. The war in Yemen began in 2014, when the Houthi rebels seized control of the capital and most of Yemen's northwest, eventually sending the government into exile. A coalition of Arab nations led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, with some support from the United States, began bombing Yemen in 2015, hoping to push the Houthis back and restore the government. Instead, the war has settled into a stalemate and the Houthis have developed increasingly sophisticated ways of striking back at Saudi Arabia, most notably with drones. Mr. Zwijnenberg, the researcher, said the drones gave the Houthis an edge because they were cheap to produce, hard to detect and shoot down, and able to cause damage and disruption that was hugely disproportionate to their cost. While the Houthis' exact capabilities are not known, they have clearly developed over time. They are learning to adapt their drone capabilities to specifically attack Saudi targets, avoiding detection, avoiding interception, which means that in the future they have a larger set of targets to choose from, he said. The Houthis' alliance with Iran also raises the possibility that its successes could be shared with other Iranian-aligned militant groups elsewhere in the region. These are also lessons that can be shared with other Shia groups in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, he said. The conflict in Yemen has killed thousands of civilians, many of them in Saudi airstrikes using American-made weapons. It has also created the world's worst humanitarian crisis, put millions of people at risk of starvation, and left millions of others homeless. In a report presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva this week, a panel of experts said both sides in the conflict were committing horrific human rights abuses including arbitrary killings, rape, and torture, with impunity. The atrocities underscored the collective failure of the international community, the panel said. After a period of relative calm, following a ceasefire brokered late last year, tensions have escalated again in recent months. Houthi forces attacked Saudi pipelines and other oil infrastructure in May, temporarily halting the flow of crude oil, and in June they struck an airport in Saudi Arabia, wounding dozens of people. In July, in a major blow to the Saudi-led coalition, the United Arab Emirates, which had been providing arms, money and, crucially, ground troops in Yemen, announced a rapid pullout from a conflict that had become too costly. The move left diplomats and analysts wondering whether Saudi Arabia would continue the war on its own. Although the Trump administration has been a vocal supporter of Saudi efforts to deter Iran and its allies in the region, congressional opposition to the sale of arms and the deployment of extra troops in Saudi Arabia has limited the scope of support from the United States.